What's up, guys? I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are The Watchmen.
The men who watch.
If it's on a screen, we're watching it, talking about it, and sharing our thoughts about it with you guys.
Today we are going to discuss our top 5 favorite football movies of all time.
Yes, this should be fun. And again, truth be told, we don't let ourselves know to each other what our lists are. So when we find out on the show, it's a surprise to both of us as well. And I'm optimistic to think we might have a couple on here that we might have in common, but we will find out. But before we jump into the list, I just want to say a quick thank you to all of you who are watching our show on our YouTube channel. Please continue to do so and subscribe if you haven't already, and like the video. And if you're listening on our podcast, thank you for doing so as well. And we appreciate your guys' support.
All right, before we get into this, Norb, we got to talk a little bit about football, just football in general. I grew up in Selah, Washington. I was in a football family. My dad played football for the University of Washington, and then he became a head football coach in the town where I grew up. And football was a part of my life. Every football season, I would be at the games. Friday night lights were wonderful. I have very, very happy memories. I was a ball boy. And then when I hit 7th grade, I played football all the way through high school. I wasn't the best at it, but I found my place and I had my moments, and I'm thankful for that. But football was a part of my life growing up, and then after that, I went to college and did other things. But Norb, I know football is a big part of your life, even today, even more than me. So I would like to hear you just talk briefly about what football means to you.
Well, yeah, football is a big part of my life as well. I owe my interest in football to my dad. My dad was watching football before I didn't even know what it was. I would hear him, watching the game and cheering and yelling and stuff, but I wasn't really even into it. But then in the late 70s, I started getting more into it. I started watching. I remember the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Dallas Cowboys going at it in the late 70s in the Super Bowl. And I remember at the time I was reading, I didn't like the black and yellow team. I liked the white team. Plus there was a guy named Roger Staubach who was quarterback, and Staubach sounded a lot like Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica. So I immediately thought, I want to root for those guys because I like Starbuck and that sounds a lot like him. So I was a Dallas Cowboys fan for a while, and I didn't even know about the Seattle Seahawks for a couple more years later. But it's around the time that I transitioned from becoming a Seahawks fan to also my dad encouraging me to play football in Little League. I didn't even really want to play. I was kind of thinking, well, I might get hurt or something, but my dad said, you should play. So I joined the Talbot Hill Tigers, I believe it was in 5th grade. And what was exciting about that was we won the championship that year. And I was one of the star players because we had this play. They called it the Norbert play because it almost always got a touchdown. And back then, you got to remember, we didn't throw the ball a lot. Quarterbacks couldn't throw. You mostly ran. So we'd run these power I formations where it's just you'd hand the ball up to your running back, he'd run up the middle, and you just try to stop him. We just do that so many times. Well, we'd have this fake where I would line up. I was what they call it, a flanker or a 4th back. So I'd line up kind of on the edge of behind the tight end, and what they'd do is they'd fake it to the guy the running back running up the middle, and then I would go around the edge on a reverse, and then I would take the ball on a handoff and run around the edge, and they were all biting on the fake. And so I would just turn that corner, and I had wheels back then. I was like one of the faster guys at the time. So I was sprinting around that corner, and I was gone. So I scored a lot of touchdowns in my first year. Probably my most prolific year. Sadly, after that, I wasn't quite as dominating. People got faster, and, so I had to work a lot harder to try to get my spot. But happy memories. That's the only team I ever won a championship with was my first year playing. So it was all downhill from there. But no, I enjoyed it. I played through high school like you did. Unfortunately, in high school, I had some injuries, broke some things, broke my hand and broke a finger, so it kind of limited what I could do, unfortunately, in my high school years. But the memories are still there, and the playing under the lights, the Friday night lights is always a special memory. Playing at French Field for the first time, looking up and just seeing lights in a big stadium with the crowd was something I'll never forget. And knowing your family and friends are in the stands was a pretty cool memory. So then that was my my adolescent side of football, and I was a Seahawks fan then, but the Seahawks were very not very good for a long time till they had some success in playoffs a little bit, a few years after they were formed, but never any kind of lasting success. So fast forward to after college and being married and everything, I'd been going to Seahawks games regularly in person in the 90s, back in the Kingdome and then at Husky Stadium and then now at CenturyLink Field. But where things have really kind of had a revival for me in terms of not just being a fan, but what I do here on social media was the year that we went to the Super Bowl. I put my love of filmmaking together with my love of the Seahawks. It took me all these years to finally do it, but it came at a good time when I started doing videos as a fan for the Seahawks, and it was the year that they went to the Super Bowl. So after doing a lot of reaction videos in the stadiums, I came up with this name called norb-cam, and that's kind of what I am. norb-cam.com, norb-cam on YouTube, Instagram, and I'd say the least, I definitely have developed quite a following with Seahawks fans in the Pacific Northwest and around the world who've come to love my videos, which started off as reaction videos, a trip to the Super Bowl, and then from there, I just started doing a whole bunch of stuff from just vlogs to music videos to Rivals, where Mike has even been a regular character in there as an 80s Broncos fan, where we've battled each other. And so it's been a real fun trip to be able to take that love of the Seahawks and my love of the sport in general and then combine it with what we do as filmmakers. And it's been fun to even bring you along for the ride as well. So that's been a big part of football in my life, after college and now still going now. So talking about football and football films is definitely a special one because it's such a big part of my life every year. So I'm excited to talk more about it.
Speaking of a fun trip, I do have one little 7th grade football story to share. And again, going back to when I turned out for football in 7th grade, I wasn't a big kid. And so because I wasn't big, I was encouraged to be a defensive back or a receiver. It's kind of, I think that's where you ended up if you weren't big. Because if you're big, you're a lineman or a linebacker. If you're a quarterback, you're a quarterback. But they made me a cornerback, as in defensive back cornerback. And I didn't have any football training. I mean, my dad was a coach, but I never had worn pads. It was a brand new thing for me. I mean, I watched it on TV, but when you're out there, and I always remember I had a hard time because sometimes the line would open up and this running back would just be barreling down on me. And I remember I would say to the coaches, I'd say, I don't know how to tackle. And they'd say, you just break down and just lift him up. And I'm thinking, this guy's like 160, 70 pounds, and this is 7th grade, and I'm like 120. And so it happened one time that the line just opened up, and the kid who was way ahead of us in maturity is barreling at me. And I had this idea. I stepped aside and put my foot out and I tripped him. And I remember he hit my foot and he just flew. He went sprawling on the ground. And I remember in a matter of about 5 seconds, my brain processed and I thought, wow, that worked really well. And then I thought, that worked too well. That's probably illegal because it worked too well. Yeah. And about that time, I can hear the coach screaming, "Lorraine, get over here!" And I walk over and he goes, "No tripping! You can't trip! Start running!" And he start running, so I had to go run until he told me to stop. And I remember that moment. My great idea turned into
that's pretty funny.
Not so great an idea.
I don't think you ever told me that. Yeah, there's so many stories, but running, that was definitely a theme. They ran us like crazy. I mean,
they did.
There was never a team where they just always punished and pushed us. I mean, it was sometimes torturous out there wearing your pads. Sometimes it's super hot, but they loved to run us.
Told us water for sissies.
Yep, climbing out those hills, whatever they would, torturing methods they had for us. Yeah. But man, it made us into good shape at the time, though. But yeah, and I remember for me some of the first, besides playing football and all those experiences, it was also I got stung by a lot of bees. I remember the first day of practice, a bee flew up my pants. And it stung me inside my pants. So I was like, what is that? I kind of touched it and I felt it sting me. So I started whapping my hand. This is on the first day of practice. This is how it started. As I'm waiting, I got there early, waiting for the practice to even show up, for the players to show up, and I get stung by this bee. And that was just one. And then there was another time it flew up my sleeve and stung me. I don't know where these bees were coming from, but they apparently liked me really well. So I had way too many B experiences. No one stung me on my hand during a practice. It's just like, add to that and all the fun of getting run and tortured and beat up during a practice. Rough times, but then again, some of the best memories too, when you survive it all and have some glory on the field.
Yep. Well, I know we took a little time to talk about some football memories,
Context.
but I think it's important. I mean, I know how much football is a part of your life, even today. I mean, it's a basis for everything you've done as far as your love of the Seahawks and YouTube. So it's important. It's important.
Yeah.
I think it's an important show. I'm kind of in my mind this whole week as I was preparing. I was kind of calling this Norb's show because he's the football guy and this is really his show. So I'm along for the ride.
Well, and again for this list, it's tough to narrow it down to 5. And I know I'm going to be leaving some off that you'll probably be thinking what? But then again, it's like. It's just such a range because there have been a lot of football movies made, and it was hard to really put them on here. But I had to try to weigh in, how they affected me, cinematically, emotionally, some of them newer, some of them older, and you have to weigh all that into context. But hopefully we did justice to the movies that we picked here. But It was a challenge, always is, but this one in particular too was very challenging.
All right, so starting with my number 5. This movie was recommended to me by a producer we know who's local in the area that we've worked with, and he said I should see this one. And this is a movie from 1979, and it's called North Dallas 40.
That's on my number 5 as well.
Look at that.
Good one.
North Dallas 40 is a brutal, and I mean brutal, satire of American professional football in which a veteran pass catcher's individuality and refusal to become part of the team family is bitterly resented by his disciplinarian coaches. The National Football League refused to help in the production of this movie, suggesting it may have been too near the truth for comfort. It's made from a novel by a former NFL player, Peter Gent. This movie was directed by Ted Kotcheff, and it stars Nick Nolte as Phil Elliott and Mac Davis as Seth Maxwell, who's the QB in the story. And the North Dallas Bulls in this movie are a fictitious team made to resemble the Dallas Cowboys, but since the NFL wouldn't endorse this film, they had to come up with fictitious names. This movie is a true 70s film, from the music to the clothing to the way people treat each other. I mean, we live in a time today where we work very hard to treat people equally and with respect. And this movie shows that the 70s were a time where there was, I believe, still the toughest people win kind of mentality in the world, where you just had to be tough. And this whole story is about a football team where the point is to be good, you have to be tough. You take drugs to hide pain from your injuries. You do whatever it takes to get a win and keep playing football. This movie really reminded me of the issue back then of when people had pain, how they worked through it. Nowadays, if you get hurt in a football, I mean, you're treated very carefully. There's a lot of doctors that evaluate you. They're very careful. They want to give you time to recover. Back then, if you got hurt, they just pumped you up with drugs to hide the pain so you could keep playing. And of course, as we know today, you're just hurting yourself even worse and possibly damaging parts of your body that will never recover for the rest of your life. John Matuzak played in the NFL, and he was one of the co-stars of this movie, and he became an actor. And what I found funny is he was Sloth in the Goonies, which is one of my favorite.
Yep.
He's Sloth. And watching his character, he reminded me a lot of Lyle Alzado. You remember Lyle Alzado?
Oh, yeah.
He was a famous player with the Raiders who was the first to come out and say, steroids are bad. I took them since '69. Don't do what I did. It's going to ruin your life.
Yeah.
So, but this movie it wasn't perfect, but I really recommend it because I think it does portray a different time than exists today. And it is a look back at what football was like in the 70s. And, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. It's not perfect. I think there are things about it I don't think that are very accurate. but I liked what it portrayed. Oh, and the great thing is it's available for free on Amazon Prime. So if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch this movie right now and check it out.
So what's great about this film is, it is definitely 70s. And anytime you watch a movie that's that old, you have to kind of remember, okay, I'm watching a 70s movie.
Glasses.
Yep, you got to remember 70s editing, 70s shooting, 70s, snap zoom or zoom ins, 70s music. It's very period-like. So you have to kind of go into it knowing that that's going to come with the territory.
Didn't you love the dance scene where the people are all dancing the way they're dancing? It's all this kind of... It's kind of just
wearing the platform shoes and all these, these suits with the chest open and stuff like that. Very, very funny, very dated in that way. But Nick Nolte is awesome. Nick Nolte is, he's so old and kind of wrinkly now, but he was a young, fresh guy then. But he plays the role really well. One of his, early younger roles. And what I liked about it too was, especially now when I think it's good to remember, not only was what you brought up about how drugs were used to hide the injuries, but it was a different NFL then. This was before the days of superstars and $1 million contracts. Now, because the players are so highly paid, they've got to protect the players. And there's still injuries. Obviously the game has changed so much now because they want to limit the long-term injuries. Back then, it was like these guys were just cattle. If something's hurt, you just shoot it up with drugs and get out there. But so it reflected a very different mindset of where the game was back then and where it is now. And just even the way the game was played. Back in those days, there were a lot less penalties. There was no such thing as unnecessary roughness if you took a guy's head off running across the middle. I think you could have. There was a point where you could still grab a guy's face mask. I can't remember where they made that a penalty, but everything. There was no quarterback protections. There was no head hitting to the head. It's very much more regulated now to the point of almost over-regulation, but I understand where they're going with it. But back then, it was just a brutal game, and they didn't make a lot of money, so relatively speaking. So watching this really kind of puts you in that world where these guys did it because they just loved to play football, and they were warriors out there, and they sacrificed everything because they just wanted to play the game. Yeah. And the money wasn't really it because it wasn't that much back then. So it was for the glory, the gridiron glory of it all. But the sacrifices people made back then were just brutal. I mean, they just suffered a lot. And Nick Nolte's first scene when you open on the character, he's in his bed, he's barely able to move. He's got a bunch of pills on his counter, beer over here. I mean, the guy's just a big mess. But he puts himself to it because he loves the game. But it's also depicts that whole idea of being love of the sport. And then, of course, there was still that business side of where the owners and the general managers want you to do certain things, and if you're not with them, they'll get rid of you. So some things, in some ways, don't change that much. But that's kind of what it touches on. It's still that part of there's the player's spirit and then there's the business side. And it does a great job in the context of the old 70s NFL. So, if you can get past the 70s vibe, there's a great movie and some great performances in there. So, it's one you have to see.
I don't know why they list this as a comedy, though. This is not a comedy.
It's listed as a comedy?
They list it. It's listed on Amazon as a comedy. It says comedy, drama. I thought there was, I think, one part I laughed in it, but it's not a comedy.
It's heavy. Yeah, it's very heavy. They have funny scenes where they try to be funny and stuff, but it's definitely, I wouldn't put it as a comedy.
Me neither.
But, well, that was my number 5 as well. So let's move to number 4.
Okay, number 4 it's the one on my list that's a documentary. All the rest are feature films. And this is from 2011. It's called Undefeated. Since its founding in 1899, Manassas High School in North Memphis has never had a football team win a playoff game. In 2004, former high school coach Bill Courtney offers to help turn the Manassas Tigers around. Nurturing his players' physical and emotional strengths, Courtney's efforts pay off in 2009 when the Tigers, led by their star player, OC, seemed to have a chance to break their school's 110-year losing streak and finally win a playoff game. This is a documentary about a team that's not winners, they're losers, and about how they're trying to find a way to get to the playoffs once in their history. It was directed by Daniel Lindsay and TJ Martin, and nothing but respect for someone that wants to tackle a documentary project. They had 500 hours of footage, and these two guys also shot, did the sound, and edited the piece. And the gist of the story is that although Bill Courtney, the coach, is white and the players are black, racial tension is not the basis for the story. It's rather that the players are inspired by their coach. He's a gruff, demanding, foul-mouthed teacher. He's a volunteer coach who makes his living running a lumber business. So the story really is centered around what it means to play high school football but deal with everyday struggles in life. And as in all sports, injury can rear its ugly head, and it does here. So again, I recommend this because it's a documentary. It's a true story. Most football movies, although based on true stories, they're going to take creative liberty, and that's just because you've got to make something entertaining at a level in 2 hours where it can work for all audiences. But this is a true football movie about high school football, which is something that we can all relate to, whether we played it in a high school or just went to high school football games. But it's also about what it means to be in high school and the struggles you go through to find your own identity and just survive in a time where you are still figuring yourself out, don't have a lot of money, and there's a lot of pressures. Have you ever seen this?
I did watch this. I had almost totally forgot about that till you mentioned it. And I wasn't thinking about documentaries as part of this list. I was just thinking about narrative feature films. So I had not even considered that one. But I do remember watching that, and that was a really good, if I recall, I did watch it once. It's been a few years, but I do remember thinking this is a really good story, and it was a really well told documentary because the team, how they turned things around.
Well, the reason I count it is because it did have a theatrical release. So. Right.
Oh yeah, no, I did totally fair game. Fair game. I just hadn't thought about it in terms of features, but yeah, that was good. I remember doing some research at the time. I think it was recommended. It was around the same time you and I both were,
Yes.
We're told to watch it, so I think that's why we did. So, yeah, that was a good choice. Well, for my number 4, this is a movie that many of you, I'm sure, remember, but it's been a while. But this is kind of, I think, almost more rom-com, more romantic comedy than football, but it is technically a football movie, and that would be the movie Jerry Maguire.
Jerry Maguire is my honorable mention.
Okay. So, and this was one of those ones where I had a few movies that were sliding back and forth. Like, what is that? Oh, that's really good. So, the plot synopsis, if you don't know it, is when slick sports agent Jerry Maguire, played by Tom Cruise, has a crisis of conscience, he pens a heartfelt, company-wide memo that promptly gets him fired. Desperate to hang on to the athletes that he represents, Jerry starts his own management firm with only single mother Dorothy Boyd, played by Renee Zellweger, joining him in his new venture. Banking on their one sole client, football player Rod Tidwell, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., Jerry and Dorothy begin to fall in love as they struggle to make their business work. And this movie, a lot of why I think it's great, Tom Cruise is really good in it, Renee Zellweger is great, and Cuba Gooding Jr. is hilarious. He's hilarious as a sort of wild, very spontaneous, emotional character who's he wants to stay with Tom Cruise as the only guy who hasn't left him. But he's like, I believe in you, Jerry, And of course, that's what spawned several cultural iconic phrases of the time, and it still lingers today. And I think of the phrase, show me the money. That came from that movie. You had me at hello came from that movie. And of course, you complete me came from that movie. And the sole impact of just those phrases, for a long time, they were like phrases you couldn't get away from for a long period of time. And that was in the 90s. I forgot what year it came out. But it's a really good story. Again, probably more on the rom-com side, but there was football in it. Again, Cuba Gooding Jr. plays a receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. And really, I think who steals the show is the little kid. His name is Ray. But he's probably now like in his 30s. But at the time, he was this little, I think maybe 6 or 7-year-old boy, but he was a show stealer. A little cute, adorable kid who in the movie Tom Cruise falls in love with is the son of Renee Zellweger. And he's just hilarious. He's a funny little kid, so cute. And at the time, I remember that was, he was such a surprising character in this movie that's all about football and his agency, but yeah, this little kid who just is so endearing and is a big part of why it's the glue of what brings him to, in this relationship. So, Jerry Maguire, that's my number 4.
The reason Jerry Maguire is my honorable mention is because I think it's important because of Show Me the Money. But to be honest, the cute kid is probably the one turnoff of the movie for me. At the time it was out, I didn't have a family of my own, but I wasn't into cute kids in movies. That wasn't what would pull at my heartstrings. Now, I know it would pull at other people's heartstrings, like yours. But for me, I just kind of thought, okay, this kid's here to be cute. Clearly, that's why he's in this movie. He's meant to make you go, "Aww." And it's like when you feel like someone wants to make you cry. I feel like someone wants to make me go, "Ah," and I don't feel like doing that because it's not naturally motivated. I feel like it's being forced on me.
Yeah, but I think, though, unlike sometimes they'll put something that's just cute because it looks cute, and then you just get that awe moment. But this kid had personality. He was funny. He had lines that he would banter with Tom Cruise, and I don't know how much of it was scripted or how much of it was just sort of improv, because it seemed very natural. So the kid didn't just he wasn't just like a baby for prop appeal, but he actually had witty dialogue exchanges, which I thought played off well with Tom Cruise. I thought he was more than just eye candy cuteness. He actually had a good personality that was not an annoying kid. There's a lot of annoying cute kids that make them not cute because they're annoying, but this kid was actually his personality that made him, I think, a very adorable kid, because it wasn't just that he looked cute, but he had an engaging, endearing personality, which was part of why you want things to work out with Tom Cruise. Because if you hated the kid, you'd be like, "See ya, you're a brat." But instead, you're like, "Oh, I want Tom Cruise to be with this kid," because he is such a cool character that I think brings out that softer side of Tom Cruise. So I disagree. I don't think it was that it was just brought on there for the cute factor. I think it was more of an important factor to his role than that.
Well, again, the movie is in my honorable mention. So that side of the movie, I didn't hate it. It's the part I kind of just didn't ignored. But Show Me the Money is why this movie to me is so great, because that spawned a cultural phenomenon in that whole phrase. And the way Cuba Gooding Jr., he's on the phone, he says, just one thing, Jerry, show me the money. And then they get into the rap.
He turns the rating, he turns the music. Yeah, he starts dancing
and
to
he's
it.
Dancing with, and his brother's behind him doing it. And it was so good. And then, Tom Cruise is in his office screaming at his phone, and everybody's looking at him. I mean, that is a memorable scene that is iconic. And it will never be forgotten. It's one of those movie moments.
And whoever wrote that, and again, they wrote three lines that were well imitated after that. You complete me, and you had me at hello. But show me the money for sure was the catchphrase of that show, and is one of the the iconic phrases of the '90s. So well, I'm glad it's at least on both of our lists.
They forever on the radio played a Bruce Springsteen song, Secret Garden, and some radio station added all those lines into it, like you had me at hello and just shut up. Yeah, so the whole song during it, every time Springsteen would stop singing, they'd add a little soundbite from Jerry Maguire, and they played it on the radio. That's how that movie,
including Show Me the Money.
No, because it was more of the Secret Garden is more of a romantic.
I can't see that line fitting in there, but all the lovey-dovey
all the
stuff.
other ones, all the lovey ones.
Yeah, you complete me.
Yep. It was a way for you to emotionally feel those lines in the middle of an emotional song. So they're trying to even make it more emotional.
I never heard that one. I never heard that. That was pretty cool.
All right. So moving on to number 3. My number 3 is a movie that you recommended to me, and I'm really glad you did. It is called Draft Day. Sonny Weaver Jr., played by Kevin Costner, is the general manager of the Cleveland Browns football team. They're one of pro football's most important days. The NFL Day is drawing near. But Sonny has much more in his mind than just which players to recruit. His lover, Jennifer Gardner, is pregnant, and the team's owner, Frank Langella, wants to fire him. After Sonny accepts a deal with Seattle Seahawks that nets him the team's first-round pick, he immediately wonders if he has made the right choice for himself and the Browns. This movie is all about negotiation. It's all about teams negotiating draft picks and what general managers of a football team, what their job is. It taught me so much that I didn't understand about the way that system works. You hear about the draft, and I mean, we just had the draft just a week ago, and okay, it's draft day and all that. But watching this movie, it was an education for me. I really got my head wrapped around, and I watched it with my wife who loves the Seahawks, and she told me, she said, this is why the general manager and the head coach of the football team have to have a really tight relationship, and why Pete Carroll has such a good relationship with the general manager of the Seahawks.
John Schneider.
Yep. And so I learned so much, and it's another thing too. I myself, I've never been a great negotiator. I've always been of the, let's just be honest and talk about where we need to be honestly, and we'll just come up with an honest approach to a problem. But in this world, it is all about trying to, as the line from the movie said, fleece him. That's what the Seahawks GM told the fictitious Seahawks coach when he was going to negotiate with Kevin Costner's character about giving him a draft pick so they could get the quarterback that they desperately need for the Browns. I mean, he says, fleece him. And so he then gets him over the barrel and says, you got to give me 3 picks from your next 3 seasons. And apparently my wife told me that is unheard of and ridiculous, and no one would ever agree to that. But it's insane. But they even say it's insane in the movie. So I love this movie for that. And then I will add what I really loved it for was the split screen tricks they came up with and the phone conversations. Because this movie is a talking movie. There's so much about talking. And so they have characters talking to each other on the phone all the time. And so they do a split screen where there's a line down the center. They show the guy here and they show the guy here. But then they used visual effects artists to make Kevin Costner's shoulder creep over the center line. And then sometimes he would walk right through and leave. And I was watching that going, I have never seen anyone do this. This is so creative. This is so interesting, so clever. They took a boring stuff we've seen in tons of movies, and they made it completely fresh and interesting. And my hat is off to Yvonne Reitman and his team for coming up with that idea. I was shocked at the beginning. The very first shot of the movie is of the Space Needle, this beautiful shot. The camera flies by the Space Needle. I'm thinking, Seattle, I love you. And then we get into the Seahawks headquarters. I'm thinking the Seahawks. I didn't know the Seahawks were in this. And there were so many great surprises in that movie. And I had to laugh about the music. Every time they show a new stadium, they've got this music fanfare that is just so grandiose and uplifting. Like, this is the Browns stadium. The drone is flying over it. And the music just crescendos into this wonderful orchestra of sound. And I was so amused and entertained at how they turn a football stadium shot into like it's the most epic war battle scene you'll ever experience in a movie. So I really like this movie, and thank you, Norb, for recommending it to me.
That's funny. I actually forgot that I recommended it to you. And what's funny is I recommended it to you, and you liked it more than I did because that's not even on my list. But I will agree with you. It's a great movie to see. If you don't know how the draft works or kind of know about the draft but never really know all the behind the scenes, this is a great educational glimpse at what the draft is sort of like. That part and the things you mentioned in terms of the technical, the split screens and things like that. I'd forgotten all about the split screens. That stuff is great. And what I particularly loved, I loved and yet laughed at the same time, was the fact that they depicted that he's negotiating on behalf of the Seahawks, which I'm like, oh, my team's represented. But of course, it's this alter reality because we had I can't remember what year it came out, but it was not that long after we won the Super Bowl. But in this reality of this film, we're like the worst team in the league who has the number 1 draft pick because we are the we finished the worst. So there's people outside the training camp picketing because they're so bad.
Yep.
I'm going, this is not, whoa, what reality is this? This is like 70s Seahawks or something. So it was a little funny to think, okay, the Seattle Seahawks are depicted as being like the complete opposite of what they really are, which is, it was nice at the time to watch it and go, glad this is not reality, folks. We're way better than this. So that part was fun. So how can I not like a movie where the Seahawks are the central team in all this? I also liked the fact that when they did the draft, they were actually using real footage of real players being drafted. And I can't remember if they did it in the real draft or they simulated it and brought players in, but whatever it is,
that's
they
a
took
great
real
question,
footage in there.
Norb. Sorry to interrupt you, but because I have a physical media copy of this movie, I watched the hour making of documentary after the movie, and I got to learn all kinds of facts, just like that they really did film at the NFL draft.
Which
they
is
were
what I
there.
thought.
And they got the commissioner of the NFL to even deliver some fake lines saying they're drafting these fictitious characters.
That's
they
what
got
I
him to
remember.
be in
That's
it.
what I thought.
So they filmed at the draft, and it was amazing listening to him talk about how they had to coordinate with all these camera crews from ESPN, and of course there was all this jockeying for position. The ESPN crews, they're like, you better not get in our shot. So there was they had to look a lot of talking.
And that's what I thought was cool. I remember at the time thinking, this is weird. We got this totally fictitious version of the Seahawks integrated with this very real actual draft. So it was like, it's alter reality mixed with real reality. And it was a little weird. It's like, well, wait a minute. My Seahawks are in last place, but this is the real draft. It was a weird reality to grab into because it was supposed to be very current. So for that reason, I give them all props on that. There's one thing that really, if I recall now that now that we're going down memory lane on this movie, is the love interest part. And I don't have the specifics. I haven't seen it fresh enough to remember, but I remember there was a love interest part. I think that I thought this is pointless. Why are we even? They stuck it in. It's like our review of Bridge on the River Kwai. Somebody almost felt like, guys, there's too much draft and football stuff. We need to get some romance in here. We need something because otherwise women won't come watch this movie. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Just like in Bridge on the River Kwai. It's a war movie. Let's talk about the war. No, we got to have a woman and somebody he loves. So I felt like they threw that in there just to make somebody happy because they didn't have enough of that in there. I thought that was a complete waste of time. They didn't need to do it. It felt forced and manipulative.
If they'd done away with that, I disagree with you. I agree with you.
Yeah,
that was the one part of the movie I didn't care for. I thought the romance was completely forced.
I would have held it on a higher standard if they'd gotten rid of that and just focused entirely about what the movie is titled, which is Draft Day.
Unfortunately, that was a small part of it.
It was small, but it bugged me. It bugged me in a ways like, okay, I have to deal with this. Can we just go back to the draft? Can we just get on the phone and talk about football and not deal with this whatever relationship thing that they
wasn't endearing enough for you?
It was a waste. I was pissed off. I was like, you're wasting my time here. Why am I dealing with 15, 20 minutes of the movie on this when it has no bearing at all with what's going on? Let's just get back to football. Anyway, that's my main thing about that movie. So probably the reason why I didn't put it on my list because of that. You failed.
Well, it sounds to me like the other reason you didn't put it on your list because it wasn't the education for you that it was for me. I was fascinated by just learning about how the draft works because I really didn't understand it. But to you, someone who's diehard football, to you it's like, yeah, I know all that. So
yeah, I still enjoyed the depiction of it because I've watched a lot of behind the scenes stuff, so I know how it goes, but of course we never get to hear how they talk. So this is fun to actually hear what they might actually say when we've seen the cameras where they go, okay, we're inside the Seahawks war room and you see John Schneider talking with Pete Carroll and they're like pointing at screens. You're going, I wonder what they're saying. And this movie made it feel like, okay, maybe this is what it would sound like if they're actually talking and using words like fleece and all that kind of stuff. So that part still was cool. And again, it was about the Seahawks. I mean, not very often the Seahawks get depicted in a movie. It's, so there's always gonna be the Cowboys and big teams like that, but rarely do you ever get the Seahawks, depicted in big films. So that part was cool.
Speaking of that leads me into one question I had for you after watching this movie, because my wife and I talked at length about how the relationship between the GM and the head coach is so important, because the GM is the one negotiating for the draft picks and the coach is the one who gets stuck with whatever the GM negotiated for and has to make it work. So obviously, it's known clearly in Seahawks history that Mike Holmgren was the GM and the head coach. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Holmgren was a most successful coach at the Packers, And Paul Allen said, come here, I'm going to let you be the GM and the head coach. And it was a fail. But I would like to know from you why you think it was a fail.
Well, I wouldn't say it was a fail entirely because there was a certain Super Bowl 40, which they should have won. So there was really a team that was clearly better than the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's be honest, the Seahawks got screwed out of that Super Bowl, okay? The Seahawks outplayed the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger had a horrible game, and if not for some really bad referee calls, we should have been the team. We went into that being, the team that clearly was on paper a much better team, and we just, we had some injuries, but really the story has always been the officials, really messing it up for that team. Anyway, so there was that period. That was our window. That was our time. And had he won that game, I don't think anybody would have said it was a fail. They would have said, well, too bad I didn't win two, but they should have won one. And they did that under, this was 2005. And this was right smack in the middle. He took over as a coach in 1999 and built that team up. So by 2005, that was his team, all his people in there. His guy, Matt Hasselbeck, he would leave 4 years later. That would be the end of his coaching stint. So almost smack in the middle of his tenure was one of the best teams we fielded at that time. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out, but we should have won it. And had we'd won that one, I think they would have been hats off. He would have built, have been one of the teams that should have won the Super Bowl that he had constructed. So I don't think it was really that it was really a failure.
Well, how often is it, how many teams have the GM and the head coach be the same person? Is that a common thing?
It's not very common. No, it's not very common. I'm trying to think, Dallas has an unusual thing where the owner, Jerry Jones, is also the GM. So you have an owner. Most owners are kind of like in the background and they just sort of like the guy in the booth kind of like reacting. But Jerry Jones he not only owns the team, but he calls the personnel shots. He's very much almost too involved. And I think sometimes his ego and his being an owner gets in the way of having the right guy calling the shots as a GM. So there's been some questions as to if that's a bad combination. But as far as coach, GM, I can't even name one right now. I might be missing one, but there's not a lot. I just think sometimes it's a bad idea because I think you often need to have that other, two heads are better than one. Yeah, right. And sometimes, the coach has to focus on the coaching and the GM focuses on the personnel. And as long as they have the same goals, then they work out great. But I think oftentimes it seems like it could work out because you're thinking as a coach and I need these players, so I'll go out and get these players. But there's also a salary cap and money working stuff that has to happen. And sometimes I think the coach doesn't always see that because he's just thinking for the players. The GM's got that delicate job of trying to figure out best talent, but also manage the money and the salary cap side. And that's why I think somebody who's good at just that can focus on that and make sure that he provides the coach the right players. The coach says, this is what we need. The GM goes, okay, here's what we need, but it's also what can we afford? And I think to be the coach, that would be pretty tough, especially if you have your heart set on a player. You might think or overreach because you really want that player, but it doesn't make sense financially, or you got to figure out something else. That's the beauty and the challenge, and what makes the draft so much fun in that regard. So,
well, I highly recommend this movie. It's great, and we just had the draft, so good time to watch it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what the Seahawks can do, assuming we have a football season this year. That's to be determined still as well. So we shall find out in time. But moving along, I guess we're number 3 on my list now, right? Okay, so number 3, we're going to go back in time again and to one that's I think regarded as a classic, Brian's Song. Brian Piccolo, played by James Caan, and Gale Sayers, played by Billy D. Williams, Lando Calrissian. This is the true story, and these guys are teammates in the mid-1960s, the Chicago Bears, at a time when professional football still bears a certain amount of race-based segregation. The growing friendship between the white Piccolo and the black Sayers, as well as their wives, Joy and Linda, become a symbol of harmony during the Civil Rights era. That bond grows stronger still when Piccolo receives some shattering and unexpected news. This is one of those movies again where it's regarded as a classic, and I think when people talk about football movies, this one always comes up. And it's, again, sort of like North Dallas 40. You've got to be able to put on your 70s filter on to know that you're going to get that 70s music, the 70s style. But what I really like about this film is they depict the racial divide where you've got, the white players versus the black players and the challenges of trying to make a football team. James Caan, plays Brian Piccolo, and this is based on a true story. So these are real characters, and I liked the way they did it. They depicted a lot of the scenes, and they used real footage, real Chicago Bears footage of the real Brian Piccolo and the real Gale Sayers on the field, and they'll cleverly intercut it with the actors, recreating certain moments. But this is one of those really good early, black player or black partner with a white partner type of movies. You see it all the time now in police type shows. But it started out where these guys, Brian Piccolo, James Caan is kind of this wise guy, and Gale Sayers is he's sort of a soft-spoken, a little bit wet behind the ears guy, and James Caan, Brian Piccolo, is constantly making fun of him, putting him down, putting pranks on him. So you get a lot of that sort of, these guys have a very tense, rough start to their relationship, but over time, during the course of the film, Gale Sayers, Billy D. Williams' character, gets hurt, and James Caan says, "I'm going to build you back up," because they're fighting for the same position. And he said, "If I'm going to lose to you, I need to do it when you're at 100%. I don't want to be the guy who came in just because you were hurt. I want to lose my job to you, or I want to win my job knowing that you were still healthy." And at one point, the victory of the story kind of comes together where they both end up in the backfield together. So it's kind of this, again, starts off rough. Then there's this part where one of them's down, but he brings them up for selfish reasons. But then over the course of it, they get better, they bond. Then they're in the tandem together. And just where things were going great, that's when Brian Piccolo gets hit with this, again, shattering, unexpected news. I'm debating whether I should say what it is as a spoiler type thing. I know it's an old movie, and generally we talk about spoilers, but basically it becomes an issue that it totally derails his career, and it becomes then a humanity bond between the friendship that has now grown from these guys who were contentious, competitive guys who really hated each other. And then you find the bond that has grown to this point where it cascades at the movie. So it's very emotional. And again, it's one of those things where I kept watching going, man, if this could have been done in an era where the music wasn't so campy, the shooting wasn't so raw, it would really hit me differently, much more emotionally. But even with all that said, it still is a really good, coming of age, developing and working through these challenges where you have two people on totally opposite sides becoming the best of friends.
Brian's Song is a movie I did see. Unfortunately, I saw it when I was a kid, and I don't remember much of it because what I do remember is it was really sad, and I was seeing grown men sob and cry, and I remember that really disturbed me because as a kid, I didn't understand my own emotions, and it was hard to watch something with so much crying and sadness. I never watched it again.
It is very sad. Yeah. And it could have been even more powerful if I think about, if had the music been a little bit different. But Billy D. Williams, it's fun to watch Lando Calrissian. This is very young, dapper guy, same with James Caan. But there's sometimes it's a little bit 70s overacted. But again, while appreciating the time that it is, I thought this was a very, cutting edge at the time of creating these, this type of relationship. We hadn't really seen, I think, race, and especially in sports, dealt with on this level. And it's based on a true story. So that part of it, it's hard to deny the power of that when you realize, a lot of this really did happen.
All right.
So that's Brian's Song, my number 3.
So my number 1 and 2, it was a fierce battle because both these movies I like a lot. And I really struggled on which one to give number 2 and number 1. And I'm confident and I'm satisfied with my decision, although it was difficult. So my number 2 is Friday Night Lights from 2004. Is that on your list anywhere?
Nope.
Okay. Friday Night Lights is about a small, turbulent town in Texas obsessed over their high school football team, the Permian Panthers, to an unhealthy degree. When the star tailback, Boobie Miles, played by Derek Luke, is seriously injured during the first game of the season, all hope is lost, and the town's dormant social problems begin to flare up. It is left to the inspiring abilities of new coach Gary Gaines, played by Billy Bob Thornton, to instill in the other team members, and by proxy, the town itself, a sense of self-respect and honor. This movie is directed by Peter Berg. It also co-stars Lucas Black as Mike Winchell, who's the quarterback. And it also co-stars one of your favorite actors, Garrett Hedlund from Tron Legacy, as Don Billingsley. Which that's probably why it's not on your list, because this has Garrett Hedlund. He was in Tron Legacy. Tron Legacy sucked, and I'm not gonna put this movie on my list because of Garrett. So
actually,
anyway.
I didn't even realize the Tron Legacy dude was in that. So
sure.
But
yeah, right,
now that you mentioned it, that's just one more ding on it. So
I know you didn't realize it. So Friday Night Lights worked really, really well for me. I am a big fan of Peter Berg. He has approached as a director projects and subjects that usually involve real life events that happened or real life experiences. And because I own the disc and I've actually listened to the commentary by Peter Berg, he talked about that he went to Odessa to do research on this film. And when he went there, all the townspeople, and this is a small town, mind you, they were all very open arms, very friendly, welcome. What can we do? We know you're going to talk about our great football team, and we couldn't be more proud of these boys, and whatever you need. And then they slowly found out that Peter Berg was actually making this a movie about why small towns can be a cancer to a football team, meaning that these boys are put up on pedestals way too high that they should be at for their age, and about how the minute they lose, those townspeople will run that coach out of town faster than you can say Odessa, Texas. And so it was slowly, word started spreading that Peter Berg was going to make a movie about small town problems, and he said it was amazing how all of the sudden the friendliness was gone. They wanted to try to figure out how to drive him out of town. They were trying to figure out how they could block this movie from getting made. And that rings home to me because I grew up in a small town with a head football coach of a small town high school, and those things happened in my town as well. There were people that did not like my dad. I spent many fall morning waking up with beer bottles on our lawn because we lost the game Friday night. Someone wanted to take my dad out and behind the barn and fight him because he didn't play his son enough. So this movie is about that kind of stuff. So it really rang true to me. And I think it hit on a lot of those very things that happen in small towns across America when it comes to small towns and sports. So this movie to me is the only football movie I have ever seen that has approached that subject. And I think that's a hugely important subject because it's one thing when you lose, but it's another thing that when you're winners and you win constantly, people don't even give you the chance to lose. They expect you to never lose because it's all about bragging rights that we're the best. And there are some just memorable scenes in that movie that touch on all those subjects. And this movie also spawned a 5-season television series called Friday Night Lights, which I've watched the first couple seasons and I liked them. Unfortunately, it got a little too soap opera for me and I started losing interest, which is why I haven't finished it. But boy, probably one of the few times I'll say the first season was better because I think it just dealt with the football a little bit more. But season 2, unfortunately, it started going into more just about everybody's relationships. And there was less football.
More drama.
More drama, exactly. And then I started, probably about the time I lost interest was about the time your girls would get interested on that
probably
series.
True.
So Friday Night Lights is my number 2. I highly recommend it.
Did we see this movie together? I feel like we might have.
We saw this with the Eastside Catholic High School football team.
That's what I thought. That's right. Okay, because I remember it was important because it was during the time when we were producing highlight videos for the Eastside Catholic football team. And
that's right.
That was kind of a heavy research film because it was right smack in the middle of when we were doing all that. So I remember seeing it, and it's not on my list for any reason that I don't think it's a good movie. I think for me, I remember it really revealed to me what football is different in Texas, just like a lot of sports are in different states, but football in Texas is a whole nother, it's like a whole religion down there than compared to, say, football up here in the Pacific Northwest. And that I remember that movie sort of opening my eyes to a little bit of a reality of what that must really be like, because it's hard to relate to that here, because when I'm from this area, which is not a small town, we don't have that small town vibe of, where the neighbors would, go do stuff to the coach's house or threaten him or whatever you did, which I think is all the reason why I could see why for you, personally, that would probably really make a connection with what you grew up with. But we didn't have that sort of thing. And the two things, I guess, what about that movie is, again, I'm looking at these films as lasting, effect, either culturally or on me, or just some rewatchability that makes me go back to them and want to watch them again. And I remember after seeing it, it's like two things. There was after I was done, I didn't feel that desire to have to want to rewatch it again. It was just didn't have those memorable sort of moments where I was like, oh, I want to rewatch it for this. It was just one of those, I'm glad I saw it. It was just good, overall film. And just in the same way, in relating to the Eastside Catholic team, I remember Coach Bill Marsh, who was the head coach at the time, really had high hopes for this show. And I remember he bought the soundtrack, because at the time we were using soundtracks from different movies that were, fitting for football. And he was like, oh, we need to get the soundtrack for Friday Night Lights. You guys can use the music from it. And I remember him being super disappointed because most of the music in there is just sort of like strumming steel guitar or electric guitar and all sort of mellow. And I remember going, here's the disc, but I don't think you're going to use any of it in this show. I just remember that particular moment that he was very disappointed in the soundtrack.
Well, you have to remember, though, you got to give it some context. We were constantly using big orchestral scores for our highlight videos.
Oh, and I'm not saying it's bad music.
I am putting this music just wasn't fitting for our.
Yeah, and I'm just saying when it comes to memories of this movie, there's the time I saw it, and Bill to complaining how this soundtrack did nothing for him. Those are my two lasting memories of Friday Night Lights. So I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I just don't really have anything that makes me go, I'm going to go watch Friday Night Lights because I remember this from it.
So you've only seen this movie one time?
One time.
Yeah, well,
one time we saw it.
I would recommend you give it another shot now that you're far away from that.
No, that's okay. Yeah, maybe I will, just to see, because I never watched the TV show series after that either. And obviously it was good enough that it warranted a series. So maybe I need to give it another look. When I have some spare time, maybe I will take another gander at it.
I will be the first to say, you grew up in Seattle area. You don't understand the small town. And
I don't.
And that's, I get it. I think for me, certainly growing up in a small town, it rang true on many levels. But for someone that didn't, hopefully you could look at it and just kind of think, well, that's what it would have been like in a small town.
That's why I know. I appreciate what you're going through. But there is a movie, I guess it's a good time to transition to my number two.
Yep.
And I'm going to make a little daring bet here that something tells me that my number two is your number one.
I would take that bet because, yes, I'm 100% positive.
Which there is some of that small town stuff that you talk about that is in Friday Night Lights. They do deal with that in this movie, if my assumption's right. But this number two for me and number one on your list has got to be Remember the Titans.
Of course.
Of course. Okay. And I had a hard debate whether to put this two or one, but I put it at two. But I'll get to number one in a second. But Remember the Titans. In Virginia, high school football is a way of life, an institution revered, each game celebrated more lavishly than Christmas, each playoff distinguished more grandly than any national holiday, and with such recognition comes powerful emotions. In 1971, high school football was everything to the people of Alexandria, but when the local school board was forced to integrate an all-black school with an all-white school, the very foundation of football's great tradition was put to the test, and this stars Denzel Washington as the coach and Will Patton as the assistant coach. And I know this movie, we have a lot to talk about here, but this movie, we had talked about Eastside Catholic football that we did videos for. And when this movie came out, this probably was the epitome of the ultimate football movie that represented that time that we were working on these movies, videos for Eastside Catholic. So this movie had so much impact and crossover to what we were doing in terms of our company making these videos, as well as us just enjoying it as a football film. And I just think it's such a, first of all, Denzel Washington's great. What movie has he not done that wasn't great? So Denzel Washington plays the character of the head coach really well, and of course deals with that struggle, the integration of the racial segregation, integrating black and white together, and that's at the heart of the tension of this movie. It's all about how are you going to get two teams, basically the all-white part of the team and the all-black team, to get together and try to win. And it's based, again, on a true story. So it's very well done. Great soundtrack, which I know we'll talk about a little bit as well, but performances were great. Another child in the show who kind of steals it, the daughter of Will Patton, the assistant coach's daughter. She's probably like 8, 9 or 10 or something like that, but she's a huge football fan, and she's constantly always like critiquing the team and screaming out of frustration, and that was a very memorable character as well. But yeah, just one of those movies that I thought it was not perfect, but is one of the best, I think, well-rounded movies that deals with a big race issue, but also captures the essence of high school football in a way that, really everybody can get behind and be inspired by. Oh, thank you, Ness. My daughter, Vanessa. Thank you for the treat. And yes, I have. Nope, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. All right, my little personal assistant.
You should have told her to start going watching Friday Night Lights, the series.
Lots of good drama for you to get into. She loves teen drama, so she might actually enjoy a sports film.
She would probably like it a lot.
Anyway, so so that's my initial take on it. Mike, let's hear what you have. I know this is number one on your list.
So, Remember the Titans we saw together. I remember Rob, you, and me went and saw it just on a weekday afternoon. Remember we just took an afternoon off from our job and went with Rob, who was working nights at the time, and we saw it at the theater. And I had pretty low expectations, but it was one of those movies that afterwards I felt that elated feeling you feel when you win a tough football game. I mean, there's nothing better than in high school football when it's down to the line and you win and you cheer and you have that emotional rush of happiness that you won. You won and you worked hard and you fought. And this movie is a feel-good movie. The racial side of it, the integration, that was the reason I struggled a little bit with giving it my number one, because I feel in movies when you use racial tension as a vehicle for emotion, it's an easy way to elicit anger out of your viewer. And I think that you have to approach it very carefully, because it's like fake something, trying to do something to make someone cry where they don't want to cry. I mean, racial comments in movies easily can make you unhappy or angry, and as they should. But when used in a movie, you have to be very, very careful. And I think this was done well. Again, it's why it's my number one. It worked in the story, but Friday Night Lights is gritty. It's gritty. It's not the happy upper that Remember the Titans is. And that's why I'd struggle. I thought, do I want to go with the happy, uplifting, feel-good film, or do I want to go with the gritty, realistic, kind of slightly depressing movie about small-town life and bad people in it? And I went on the feel-good side on this one, because I like movies where, that have bad endings. I think we talk about sometimes there's too many happy endings in movies. But, this movie, I like the feel-good happy ending. And combined with Trevor Rabin's amazing music score, I mean, it takes you to a whole level. So that's why Remember the Titans is my number one. I'll toss back to you, Norb, but I have to add my little joke. I made a note of this. It's one of my ongoing favorite little moments, is that when Remember the Titans had its home video release and they were advertising it, back then they would still have the narrator. And I always remember, I know you know this because I've used it over and over, but I always say when you hear it, the narrator says, "Starring Academy Award winner Denzel Washington." and veteran actor Will Patton.
Yeah, that's right.
And I remember thinking, Will Patton just got totally slammed.
Yep.
And yet they're promoting the film, and I thought, whoever wrote that, they think, we got to sell that Denzel has an Academy Award. We got to sell that he's got one so people will buy this movie. What about Will Patton? Well, he doesn't have an Academy Award. Well, what is he then? Well, he's a veteran actor. Okay, let's do that. Let's say, and veteran actor Will Patton. And that, to this day, is one of the funniest bad writing decisions for a promotional movie I've ever seen.
They might as well have just said, starring Academy Award winner Denzel Washington and this other guy you kind of recognize. That would have been probably just as good. Because I don't even remember the guy's name. He's not one of those names that it's on the tip of your tongue. You have to kind of, oh yeah, Will Patton, that's right.
And yet he's good. He's been in a lot of great movies.
And you see him, yeah, he was great in No Way Out. I don't know if you guys ever saw that Kevin Costner thriller, No Way Out.
He's in Gone in 60 Seconds. Yeah, he's good.
And yet, it's not a name that you just think of as like top tier, that guy that just, you think of it, name just a household name. It's those very familiar faces. I can't remember his name right now, But,
and again, remember the Titans is about their friendship between Coach Boone and Coach Yost. And really, they share the billing on screen time in this movie for the most part.
He's really good.
And yet Denzel gets all the credit. I mean, Will Patton is true. Without Will Patton, this would not be a movie on my list. Yeah, the two of them make this movie together, and it ends with them hoisting the football in the air together. I mean, that's... Again, what a great feel-good moment. So I'll touch just briefly on the music, and I know you have things to say about that, but Norb and I love the score.
Wait, don't go to the score. I want to say a couple things, and then let's talk about the score, because that by itself is definitely worthy of discussion. So while you're on the subject of Denzel and Will Patton, so there were some times where I felt like in every sports movie, you have cliche moments. It's kind of hard to do without them because it's just part of the nature. You have the montage. You have the, in this case, when you've got two people who hate each other, they have the two coaches, don't like each other off the bat. The two roommates, the whitest white guy and the blackest black guy, forced to room together. Clearly the representation of the
and the whitest white guy is Ryan Gosling before anybody knew who he was.
Yeah, that's right. But the guy who's in the racial tension character is, I forgot his name, but it's the guy who ends up dying in the movie.
Gary Pertier.
Yeah, Gary. So he and the other character, they are at the worst odds, with each other. And of course, by the end, they become buddies. And in some ways, you kind of see this. Okay, this is going to be the two guys that they're going to hate each other now, and of course later they're going to be the best of friends. And it does. And it feels a little bit like, okay, this is a little bit of I saw this long pass coming a long ways away, but you kind of have to have it. And they do it in a way where, okay, we needed this to happen. Yeah, it's a little cliche, but it's a race story, and you can't end a race story badly, so it has to end that way. But there was one part that, with the chemistry between Denzel and Will Patton, they just win the big game. The music's erupting. Everyone's on the cheering. They're hoisting guys on their shoulders. And then the two coaches come to each other. And of course, if this was a real game, they're like, yeah, good job, buddy. I know you had this. That's right. I saw you, buddy. And so he goes, I knew when you took over this team that you would show these men.
Sorry, Norb, I got to correct you. He says, you were the right person at the right time.
Okay, all right,
and then Denzel responds and says, you're Hall of Fame in my book, coach.
Yes, okay, thank you. I was just paraphrasing, but thank you for the quotes.
I've seen this movie a lot.
Come on, that's the old, okay, guys, we know it's the throngs of passion of winning, but we're going to have this very heavy little moment in the middle of the field, and even the dialogue is so quiet and intimate, and everything around them just gets quiet. Like, who's going to have the time to say these words in the middle of this field? I'm sorry, that was just, it's kind of one of those laughable sort of, okay, yeah, we got to have the, pat each other on the back and really say how great life is now. But it's a little unrealistic, but I forgive him for it because it's a sports movie and you kind of have to have that moment. I just thought it was funny because you watch that and it's just totally not reality.
Talk about Trevor, Norb.
So Trevor Rabin, who I'd never heard of before this movie, he did Gone in 60 Seconds.
All right, I got to correct you again. You have heard of Trevor Rabin. He was the lead guitarist from Yes, the 80s band.
But I hadn't heard of him as a film composer.
Okay.
I had not heard of him as a film composer. I would not have known his name until I saw it in the credits as a composer. So I did not know he was a film composer. There have been a lot of guys who've gone from bands to becoming film composers.
Like Boingo Boingo, Danny Elfman.
And others like him. Anyway, I didn't know him as a film composer. But this is this soundtrack and the score he did for this movie, by far, bar none, is the greatest sports. I don't go on a limb. I'm going to assume I'm going to offend some people who love music from other shows like The Natural and things like that. But as far as a football movie, this is the greatest score ever written. And I say that because if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't have used it to death on so many videos. I've used the score from that movie in so many projects because it is so beautiful and it's so emotional.
As a composer yourself, if you're going to say that, that carries a lot of credibility.
Yeah, I just love it, you know. There's some songs, music that you just like for different reasons, but that one just gets me every time. I could listen to certain parts of that score and I might go get moved to tears just because the music gets me there. And that's why I use it so much, because when it comes to trying to create that moment of euphoria and sports joy, he nailed it. And we used it to death on Eastside Catholic videos. I continue to use it today to the point where the girls know it so well. Like, oh, you used that song again, did you? It's like, it's so good. I can't help go to the well on that. So that is just a great, such a wonderful soundtrack. And not to mention the songs in the movie are really good too. But that's the score. Trevor Rabin, his best work ever, and one of the best, if not the best, in a sports football movie. Mike? You got to be able to add something to that too.
Well, I would just really, all I can add is I agree. That we've used that song and not just the grand parts, but the quiet parts.
The soft part is just as good.
It's a true film score. And you know what's nice is I have friends that have educated me on how John Williams has ripped off sounds from older composers you've never heard of.
Right.
And the nice thing about this score is Trevor didn't rip off anybody. He just made it. And that is something to be said in itself.
It really does stand alone. And I'm sure somebody out there would say, oh, that's not true. He ripped off this guy from Czechoslovakia who did a similar theme, 20 years earlier. I don't know. Maybe that's the case.
What I would say, show me. Don't just tell me. Show me.
I do want to
show me the money.
Show me the money! But yeah, I mean, I've used that music. I used it when we won the NFC Championship game against the 49ers. I used it in a video when we beat, I think, the Green Bay Packers. I used it when my daughter's team won to go to national. I've used it so much that it's like this cliche that I can't help myself because nothing else comes close.
Yeah.
Nothing else works as like this emotional music that just gets you when it comes to the emotions and sports. It's bar none the best. So that leads me now to my number one. And this was really hard because I kept going back and forth. Titans should go on top because the music puts it over the top. But then I had to rewatch this movie because I hadn't seen it in such a long time. And I'd seen Remember the Titans many more times since then. So I thought I need to look at this. And this is the movie Rudy. Rudy Rudiger is played by Sean Astin, and he wants to play football at the University of Notre Dame, but has neither the money or the tuition for the grades to qualify for a scholarship. So Rudy redoubles his efforts to get out of the steel mill where his father works when his best friend, Christopher Reed, dies in an accident there. And overcoming his dyslexia thanks to his friend and tutor, D-Bob, played by Jon Favreau, a young Jon Favreau, Rudy gains admission to Notre Dame and begins to fight his way onto the school's fabled football team. So this movie it came out in the early 90s, and it's one of those movies I think I saw, but then I kind of just sort of forgot about it, and a lot of other football movies came after that, so I just sort of, it kind of just lay dormant for a while. And as we explored this football list, I thought, I need to re-experience Rudy and try to wipe my slate clean and watch this again, and with a early 90s mindset. And I watched this movie, and it was what I like so much about it is it's such a pure story, and Sean Astin so good in this. He plays such a great character, and again, it's a true story. So the idea of this kid who comes from this very, he's a little guy. It's the film about the little guy being able to accomplish something. And this kid knows he's not the smartest kid, he's got a learning disability, but he's one of those guys who just has heart. No matter what he does, he does it full on, and it's like he won't let anybody outwork him. But he's never going to be the biggest guy, never be the fastest, never be the smartest, but he will work harder than anybody else. And this movie is all about, no matter how bad it is, no matter how much people tell you you're not going to amount to anything, give it up, forget your dream. He refused to do it, and he wanted so badly to do it so his dad could see him on the field one day, just to be suited up, because as a practice player, he wouldn't even be at the games. He would be in the stands watching the team, but he would be getting beat up for all the practices. That was his job, be a scout team player. But if they put you on the list as being on the roster, you could stand in uniform, come out of the tunnel, and be on the field. That's all he wanted. And so the last game, he finally gets that opportunity. But then the whole team, they earned his respect because of how hard he worked, that they not only lobbied to get him on the team on that final game, but they decided to make it so that they could get him in for one play, and he makes the most of it. And it's so emotional and it's just such a good, feel-good, the little guy does sometimes get the glory, and maybe on a small level, but if you work hard enough, you can get that moment. And it's really good, and it doesn't get too cliched, doesn't get too caught up on things. It's just a pure heart movie about a guy, and Sean Astin plays it perfectly, a guy who just refuses to quit. And if you just work hard enough, certain dreams will come true. So it's a great film. And that's why I've nudged it over Remember the Titans, because of its purity and its simplicity and its heart and the theme of that story.
Well, Trevor Rabin just said, man, come on.
I wish Trevor Rabin had scored that one. The Rudy score, I think, is also pretty famous too. But I just, Trevor Rabin, he could have scored every one of these football movies. They all would have been better if he had scored them all in my book.
So I've seen Rudy, and I liked it. I thought about it as far as a candidate for my list, but there are just other movies I wanted to put there, and I think Rudy would go down in history as the only football movie where any other football movie usually ends with someone scoring a touchdown and the crowd cheers and they win the game.
Right.
With Rudy, it's about him just getting put in and he makes a play.
Yeah.
and his team cheers. The crowd doesn't know what the heck's going on. The other team is like, what?
Yeah, the announcers are saying, the student section's cheering something. We can't make out what they're saying. Exactly. And they're all cheering, right. Rudy, and it's just cool, how everybody just got behind this kid who clearly they all knew he had no future playing football and he had no business being on a field. They all knew he was not good enough, but he worked so hard. They respected him so much that they said, he's got to get that moment. He deserves this.
Yeah, practice after practice, he just got pummeled.
Beat up. And there were even people telling him, hey, man, you're working too hard. You're making us look bad here. Coaches are all saying, if you had Rudy's heart, you would have been an All-American, and they're upset at him because he worked so hard and those guys weren't willing to work as hard at it. And that's why they earned such respect. And that's, I think, when you talk about, this is like the ultimate work ethic theme. And we always try to talk to our kids about work ethic because, it's this day and age, it's when kids have so much sort of luxury at their hands, it's easy to not have to work hard for anything. This kid is such an example of, you just got nothing going for you, and you have to work for everything you get. And so that's why I feel like this would be a movie for kids these days to appreciate.
It's kind of similar how I think I inspired people by working hard and figuring out how to trip some running back when he comes flying through the thing. And I played with heart.
Yeah, the cheap shot artist. Oh, man. Anyway, we did have a few crossovers on the list. Maybe not as many as you thought.
Yeah.
But we had some. But now we got, you already did your honorable mention.
Yeah, my honorable mention was Jerry Maguire, so it's all you.
Okay, all right. Well, so this honorable mention, this was tricky because I had a few. Friday Night Lights was floating around in there. There was also a movie called The Program that I always enjoyed, but I had to throw in The Blind Side on this one. And The Blind Side is a movie that it's about Michael Oher. Actually, I can't pronounce his name, Oher. But he's an actual, again, based on a true story, this big gargantuan guy played by Quentin Aaron. And he's a homeless black teen. has drifted in and out of the school system for years. Then Leanne Toohey, played by Sandra Bullock, and her husband, Sean, played by Tim McGraw, take him in. The Tooheys eventually become Michael's legal guardians, transforming both his life and theirs. And then Michael's tremendous size and protective instincts makes him a formidable force on the gridiron. And with help from his new family and devoted tutor, he realizes his potential as a student and a football player, and he eventually becomes an NFL player. And so this was just a good movie. It's probably one of my favorite Sandra Bullock movies, besides Speed, when she first hit on the big screen. She did a really good job in this.
I thought you were going to say The Vanishing.
Oh yeah, I really liked her screen time in The Vanishing. That's really my favorite part about that one. She's on there for like 5 minutes. No, but this is great. She was a lot like Erin Brockovich. Julia Roberts played that character. Same thing, a sassy, kind of don't take any what from anybody. And she played that character really well. I mean, she looked really good in it too. I can't deny that as well. But this whole story, I didn't know the story beforehand. I was not aware of his personal story, and so reading this, again, just a lot of the inside. They do a lot of inside things. They have a lot of cameos by real coaches in this show. So, and it's got real. It's all real colleges, all real players, and football teams mentioned. So just the storytelling of that, and just kind of the cool story about how this woman really just out of the blue just felt this intuition to go stop and pick up this random guy, this big African American guy walking down the street. She just felt like she needed to help him, and started this long story of partnership to where she took him in and helped him find his way and find his talent, and used her motherly instincts to help him, become a better player. The part where she has a talk with him and he's struggling on offensive line, and she's telling him, okay, this team is your family, and that quarterback is me. So when you look at the quarterback, you think of me, and so you have to protect him. So, and he's got such a good relationship with her. As soon as he does that, boom, he's like driving guys into the ground, off the field, into the stands. I mean, it's awesome. And so, again, because it's a true story, it's just one that it's hard not to enjoy the feel goodness of that real story, and well acted by particularly by Sandra Bullock.
I have never seen this movie, and the reason I haven't is because you just described the whole movie to me. I don't need to see it. I already know what happens. It's one of those where I feel like I saw the whole thing in the trailer. So it's not that I am going to say I don't think it's any good. It was never high on my list because I felt like I already know how it goes. So
that's unfortunately a problem with many trailers out there, is they sometimes spoil the whole thing that you don't feel like you need to see the movie. And it's too bad, because I know how much you like football movies, and I think you would have liked this one.
Well, I will end by saying, one of the greatest thing about football movies, and to me, whenever I see one, I'm always waiting for that coach inspirational speech in the locker room, because to me, that's where I'm evaluating. Okay, Mr. Writer or Mrs. Writer, whoever wrote this scene, I want you to inspire me with this speech. I want to hear your character say something I've not heard before, or say it in a way that I'm feeling it. And Friday Night Lights, I know it well. He talks about perfection, and Coach Gaines says, if you play with love in your heart, you are perfect. He says, and my heart is full. My heart is full. And to me, that's just, that's good. That's good. And Denzel Washington, completely different speech. Talks about how because of our racial integration problems, we've overcome that. Therefore, we've already won. And then he says, but let's go out there tonight and play like Titans. And that they'll remember the Titans, And you're like, yeah! And so, to me, I'm always looking for that speech. And every time I see a movie, I'm like, here it is. Here it is.
Yeah.
Is it going to move me?
Win me over, please. Don't fail me now.
And that can lead into my dishonorable mention of a movie. And so, Norb, why don't you tell our audience that we have decided to do something new?
Okay, so yeah, well, initially when you were talking about making your list, you thought you were going to throw in a movie you didn't like in the 5. I said, well, I think we should stick to the 5s being the ones we liked, and then have the honorable mention. But let's have a dishonorable mention. And maybe we want to start this trend for the rest of our list to have a dishonorable mention. Just that way we can put a movie in that you should not watch, or at least maybe you'll watch just to see how bad it is. So I said, let's both do a dishonorable mention, and you can put in one of the worst movies, football movies you've had. So yeah,
and to you listeners and viewers out there, I knew this would become our record length show. I knew it because I just know with the football side of things and Norb's love of football, I knew we'd have a lot to talk about. Thank you for sticking with us. If you're sticking with us, we're getting there. And again, I hope that you learn with our shows. Just pause whenever you want. Come back to it later. You don't have to listen to the whole thing in one shot. One of my favorite podcasts is usually an hour and a half long, and it's done weekly. And I just listen to it in parts. So again, thanks for sticking with us. But along the lines of coaches and memorable speeches, my dishonorable mention, which I think is the worst football movie I've ever seen, and it is called When the Game Stands Tall. And it is a recent movie. It came out in 2014. In 2003, high school football coach Bob, how am I going to say it, Ladoker, who's played by Jim Caviezel, who is a good actor. This coach and his De La Salle Spartans have just completed an incredible 151 consecutive victories and 12 straight state championships. While the team's seniors receive offers from colleges all over the country, the advancing juniors look forward to making their mark. However, beloved Coach Ladd has a brush with calamity, while the Spartans face their most challenging, most unpredictable season yet. This movie had zero heart. You want to talk about Coach Gaines saying my heart is full? This had no love. No, heart was empty for me. And whatever coach speech he had in there, I can't remember it. I can't tell any part of it because it was no good. Jim Caviezel is a great actor. He was a dull and boring football coach. I think he decided to approach playing this coach as a very calm, I guess using the word calamity. And it just never pulled me in. But the big thing for me, and this is why this movie is disgusting to me, I am okay with product placement in a film if it's done in a way that it's not shoved in your face. It was so obvious that Dick's Sporting Goods paid all kinds of money to fund this film because they have Dick's Sporting Goods shoved in your face through the movie. The characters go shop at Dick's Sporting Goods. Dick's Sporting Goods is a sponsor of their game. And so the announcers in the middle of this thing, so what do you think, Joe, about this next play in the Dick's Sporting Goods football game? And I was beside myself in disgust. Now, here's the thing. I understand that making movies is expensive and you need funding. I totally understand that. And if Dick's Sporting Goods wants to sponsor a football film, that is great. All for it. But what you do is at the beginning of the movie, have as a white title over black, this movie was made possible by a grant from Dick's Sporting Goods. That is the way you do it. Right at the beginning, and then you're done with it. It's an acknowledgement, but when you're shoving that name throughout the movie, to me, it made it cheap, and it made me feel like I was watching a 2-hour television commercial about Dick's Sporting Goods. So, with that, the worst football movie I've ever seen is When the Game Stands Tall. And I'm sorry to the people that worked on this movie and tried to make it great, because I know you believed in it, but unfortunately, there were just things that ruined it for me. So, don't give up. Keep trying.
Well, I never saw this movie, so maybe I dodged a bullet there.
Well, probably because I told you not to see it.
I think you did tell me about it, so this sounds very familiar. I can't add much to that except for the fact that I know that product placement is a big part of things, but usually they're more subtle. But when you have to start putting it into the dialogue and stuff like that, that can be very annoying. So, well, I want to switch over to my dishonorable mention, and I know you and I will have, while this show is already long enough, we're going to add even more to it because there's a story behind the story with this film that I'm going to mention to you.
All right.
So my dishonorable mention is Any Given Sunday. You guys remember this movie? 4 years ago, D'Amato's Al Pacino's Miami Sharks were at the top. Now his team is struggling with 3 consecutive losses, sliding attendance, and aging heroes, particularly 39-year-old quarterback Jack Cap Rooney, played by Dennis Quaid. Off the field, D'Amato is struggling with a failed marriage and estranged children, and is on a collision course with Christina Pagliacci Cameron Diaz, the young president/co-owner of the Sharks organization. So some context here.
Okay, so real quick though, I know where you're going to go with this. Let's leave names out.
I was going to leave names out.
Let's keep it all just generic. But otherwise, I'm fine to talk about it.
So this movie came out at a very interesting time because our watching this was a very grand event. It just so happened we had connections that we were able to go to the world premiere of this movie, where in attendance were professional football players.
Oliver Stone.
Agents. Oliver Stone was in the audience. There were football agents with Bluetooth. So at that time, Bluetooths weren't that common, but with the earbuds in their ear, walking around, these agents who we're talking about in Jerry Maguire, these real guys walking around. I was sort of Star Trek because we literally walked down the red carpet, which felt funny because I'm sure the people were looking like, who the hell are these dudes?
Who are those guys?
So anyway, it was surreal. So the irony is, it's probably the most star-studded event we've ever attended to the most, to me, laughable movie I've seen in a football movie. It surprises me because when I look at the rankings, this movie is actually not that badly rated, but I couldn't stand this movie. I couldn't get out of there soon enough, other than the fact that it was so cool to be in this theater with so many names that I was familiar with. But the biggest issue with me, and it was it's a sign from the beginning, if a pro football movie's done and the NFL doesn't sign on, that's a bad sign. Now, North Dallas 40, that was an old movie, dealt with drugs and all that stuff. I can see why they didn't. But every other movie we've mentioned today, pretty much they were all real teams. This NFL movie did not, football movie did not get the blessing of the NFL, which is red flag number one. But this felt like a cartoony version of what the NFL should have been like. I felt like I was watching this very Hollywooded version of a non-realistic show, and everything about it, and it's weird because these are good actors all on the screen, but everything about the way they portrayed everything, and Oliver Stone, I've liked his movies, a lot of his movies, but I couldn't stand this one. It was comical, ridiculous, and everything about it, from the fake names that they came up for the teams, to the character directions of the different, just the character backgrounds of each of these ones. And I remember one particular scene with someone we were in attendance with. There's a scene where the aging quarterback I mentioned, Dennis Quaid, he's kind of struggling, and his wife slaps him in the face and gives him this you need to get back on the field and do this and this. And I remember that person who was with us that would never happen, And so right away, I think the fact that I was having this extra ear in me telling me that this is not reality helped aid to the fact that I was not alone in the way my reaction to this film was, because it was coming from somebody who was living the sport. So anyway, everything about that movie, it was just a joke, a caricature of what I think somebody would think a movie should be about. But I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all.
Well, when it's a movie made by Oliver Stone doesn't make movies about positive things. He's usually trying to poke all kinds of holes in them and make it, show them for what they really are. So this was his way of trying to show the NFL as a messed up organization with all kinds of problems and ego-driven people. And again, you can see why the NFL isn't going to support that. The only thing about the movie I might give him a tiny bit on is I was super impressed with the editing. Remember you and I talked about it, how, man, to have been the editor on that film, the way they cut those plays, they were so fast cut.
It was fast cut.
And it would have been really hard to edit just to even make some cohesive feeling out of it. But beyond that, there's not much of this movie that I have no interest in seeing it again. So, and it's
sad because Al Pacino, I don't think I've ever seen anything that I didn't like Al Pacino in, but I heavily disliked this movie. And it was sad that the only thing you can walk away with is, that editing was something else, wasn't it? If that's all you're talking about in a movie to look for a good thing, that's a pretty bad sign.
Yep.
So, anyway.
So, for the surprise of this show, it's a small thing, but I was thinking about something football related, and This is something you've seen many times, Norb. But back when I was at the UW and I was in the dorm, about the time I was playing video games with my friend Steve, is another kid down the hall. He worked at a sports trading card collecting shop. And I remember talking to him about it. And I said, I've never collected sports cards. I said, but I'm a big fan of John Elway. I says, is there any chance you could get me like a really good John Elway card? He says, yeah, I can get you a rookie card. I said, well, how much would it be? He said, I'd get it to you for about $15. He said, because he's not Hall of Fame yet, so it's still pretty easy to trade and get. And so he did. So here is my John Elway rookie card right there that I have had ever since. And he gave it to me in this little special plastic case that keeps, he said, it's all about the corners. It says, anytime a corner is bent, its value is gone. He said, so the corners have to be perfect. So it's in this very special protective plastic case. And I had been told that over the years, it should definitely increase in value. And then John Elway went Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. So I expected this card to really increase in value. And right now you get one on eBay for about $80. So
well, I really
bad investment.
Rich from it.
Bad investment, but I really just wanted it because I was a Denver Broncos fan my entire childhood life. And
well, it cost you $15. You didn't lose money on it, so technically you more than quadrupled your money.
But being the football guy you are, Norb, why has the John Elway rookie card not increased in more value? Well, the fact he did go Hall of Fame.
You're asking the wrong guy because I know a lot of stuff about football. I don't know anything about trading cards, so I don't know what makes one card more valuable or anything like that. I don't have any card collection. Like I will show my own little thing for you though, since I rarely get to do this, and this might be a problem with the chroma key, but I'll fix it somehow. This is, as I talked earlier about my own YouTube fund, this is my own personal trading card.
Nice.
I became a member of what's called the PFUFA, which is the Pro Football Ultimate Fan Association, which is like a Hall of Fame for fans. And I got in there in 2017, and it was one of the coolest honors I've ever had. I went back to Canton, Ohio, got to go to the Hall of Fame, watched Kenny Easley get inducted live, at the Hall of Fame. So that was cool because he was one of my favorite players growing up. And then to join this very, very special organization was a very fun time. And so again, this is all because of what I've done with the Seahawks and doing the YouTube stuff and just being able to find a vehicle for being a fan, but using my skills as a filmmaker is what has made it to where I've been able to take it to another level where there's a lot of fans out there, but not a lot of fans who do a lot of video stuff like what I'm doing. So I feel lucky that I'm able to put my enthusiasm and fun into this. One other thing, because you mentioned the documentary early, and since this is like the one time I get to talk about football, I will mention a little shameless promotion of my own, but I happen to make a documentary of my own, and you can actually see it on my norb-cam YouTube channel, and it's called Superfan. And this is a documentary about my friend Mark Collins, who started the Save Our Seahawks movement back in 1996 when the team was being moved to California, when Ken Behring, the owner, wanted to move the team to California. So after I met Mark after the Super Bowl win, we became friends, and I didn't really know him before this. I knew the story of the movement, but I didn't really know Mark that well. But as I got to know him, I got to know the story, and I realized, we should make a documentary about this story because I don't think enough people know about it. So I went and made a documentary and interviewed Mama Blue and Mark himself and Rod Long, who was a comedian who was part of that movement, and one of our local radio guys, who is also a big part, who was part of KJR at that time. And so I went and made this documentary. We premiered it last fall, and it's now on YouTube for you to watch. So when you have a chance to and you're looking for other football films, you can go to my YouTube channel, norb-cam, and look up Superfan and see the story about a not very well-known story about, we all know that Paul Allen saved the team by buying them and building the stadium, but Mark Collins had a big part as to why that even happened and why we were able to get Paul Allen involved and have the vote happen. So
And it's
Anyway,
free.
Let's plug. And it's free. And I worked on it pretty much for free. And it's out there for free. So it was a labor of love, literally. But I am proud of the work, and I'm glad I could create this video that features one of my good friends now and what he did, which I think all Seahawks fans should be grateful for. So this is a long show. This got to be our longest one ever. But heck, we don't get to talk about football on this very often, so it's a rare opportunity to put all this in there. So thank you. If you're still listening, congratulations, and thank you so much because you hung in with us. So we do appreciate that. Again, for those of you watching on YouTube, we thank you. And for those of you who are listening on podcasts, please continue doing so. And if you guys have ideas for other shows, movies, TV shows, or games, please let us know either in the comments or send us a message. I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are The Watchmen.
The Men Who Watch. Thank you very much for sticking with us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for watching The Watchmen.
Please click on here to watch other episodes, and be sure to hit that like button too.
And please subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll always be alerted to any future episodes.
It really helps us out, and we appreciate it.
We'll see you next time. And remember, we'll be watching.